I'm Mark Kushevsky from the Stritch School of Medicine, where I chair the Department of Medical Education and have worked on our DREAMER project there. Today's session, as you know, has 4 members from a task force that we've had across the university called the University Collaborative on Undocumented Student, or UCUS, as it was nicely an acronym. We want to talk to you a little bit about things that have been going on across the spectrum here at the university and a little bit about where we think the future is going. We're going to have 4 speakers. The first will be Katherine Kaufka Walts, who directs the Center for Human Rights of Children at Loyola University Chicago, and she'll give you the overview of what DREAMers are, DACA, and all of these kinds of things, and the limitations and opportunities. I'll talk a little bit about the Stritch School of Medicine experience with this, because I think that both our experience has been informed by the values of the university and now has also contributed back towards that. Then we will have Kathleen Moss-Weigert, who, as many of you know, is the assistant to the provost for social justice initiatives at Loyola University Chicago. And she actually chaired and led the UCUS group and has put together the report. And then finally we'll have, last but not least, Flavio Bravo, who is the president of the Unified Student Government Association and was a member of our task force and has spearheaded many of the student-led efforts to welcome DREAMers to our university. So that's the introductions. In the interest of time, we'll just go to it one after another.
As Mark mentioned, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Katherine Kaufka Walts. I'm the director of the Center for the Human Rights of Children. I see a few familiar faces. That makes me very happy. I'm also a lawyer, and prior to coming to Loyola University, I was an immigration attorney. At the time, we did some initial policy work around the DREAM Act. The deferred action status, or DACA, as I'm going to talk about later, hadn't passed yet, but I have some practitioner experience with this issue, as well as other issues related to undocumented persons. So my very brief part of the presentation is to really address very briefly and succinctly some of the major policies and laws regarding undocumented students, specifically focusing on the DREAM Act and deferred action for early childhood arrivals, which is called DACA in related terms. So we're familiar with those as my co-panelists move forward with their presentations. And we'll also hear today about the Catholic and social justice relationship with these policies. So I think we'll start with a few basic terms. Undocumented. I'm going to focus really on the first 3. I'll talk briefly about the Dream Fund of Illinois for those of you that are not familiar with it. But for those that don't know, undocumented refers to persons, and here in the context of this presentation, undocumented students who are not U.S. citizens, not permanent residents in the United States, who don't hold a visa to be here, and who have not applied for any type of legal residency. So therefore, they don't have status in the United States. That doesn't mean that they're not eligible to apply or to be admitted to institutes of higher education, including Loyola. However, undocumented students are not eligible for federal financial aid or really any federal programs or benefits. And as we know, financial aid and access to resources is the most significant barrier to higher education. To note, some students and children, and I'll use those terms interchangeably, enter the United States with status, and then that status can expire. So I think there's a myth that all undocumented persons and undocumented students are all illegal aliens, and it's a very charged term, and that's why we use the term undocumented. They may have entered with status, and that status had expired, or they became ineligible for that status. Many students have entered the United States without status because their parents brought them here, and they were here. They came because they were joining their family, and they were young, and they really had no option to kind of consent or make an informed decision because of their age and development. And that's really the policy behind the DREAM Act, or the Development Relief and Education for Alien Minors, which is a legislative proposal. It is not a bill. It has never passed, to provide a pathway to permanent residency and U.S. citizenship for qualified undocumented immigrant students. Before I talk about the DREAM Act, kind of a preceding policy that has kind of informed this and is very timely is Playa versus Doe. And I don't know how many of you may be familiar with that Supreme Court case, but that's really the case that the Supreme Court stated that recognizing children, and this is really important, have, through no fault of their own, are here in the United States, undocumented children, that they have a right to K through 12 education. because there were schools, particularly border schools, who were instituting policies of undocumented students had to pay to attend a particular school, or there were some other kind of legalistic restrictions that were imposed on them, and the Supreme Court outlawed this. Subsequent to that, there were other states and different kind of policies that were trying to get around this via creative ways, but most of all of those have been found illegal. So recognizing that students, even those who do not have legal status, have a right through K-12 education, what happens when those students then graduate. So the DREAM Act really kind of was the next step of this, and a movement that was going on much longer before 2001 when it was initially proposed, and co-sponsored and championed by our own Illinois Senator, Senator Dick Durbin. And it was a bipartisan proposal, recognizing that we have millions of children here who are here through no fault of their own. And the numbers and the statistics around how many undocumented persons are actually in the country vary. The formal estimates range between 9 and 11 persons. 2 to 3 million of those are children. Estimated that 900,000 or over 900,000 may be eligible for DACA status, which I'll talk about later. Some of you may be familiar then with the term the Dreamers, or the movement associated with the DREAM Act. Students who are undocumented and part of the DREAM Act movement who are proposing and wanting some sort of legislation to pass to legalize their status and recognize that they are part of our country's economic, civil, social communities and part of our civil society. And I love this. This is actually, I pulled this from our website, our Student Multicultural and Diversity Affairs Department. It sometimes uses a way to navigate away from the negative connotations given to terms such as undocumented, immigrant, non-U.S. citizen, etc. It's aspirational, and it evokes, again, the tenets and the policies that these children are essentially part of our communities. The DREAM Act has not passed, but there's still hope. And in the interim, President Obama has created an executive order called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which is referred to as DACA. I'm going to talk about what it is and what it isn't, because there's often a lot of confusion around DACA. And even through our collaborative that Mark mentioned, the UCAS collaborative, we were struggling with some of the definitional terms of how do we call students who are undocumented, who are engaging in the Loyola community or trying to engage in the Loyola community, trying to apply to attend Loyola. So what DACA is, it is a form of prosecutorial discretion or deferred action that provides a work permit and relief. Actually, before work permit, it's the most important is relief from removal from the United States for 3 years, and this was actually recently changed. So relief from removal is, in other words, protection from deportation. It is not a visa. It is not amnesty. It is not a legal status. Okay, it is just discretionary prosecutorial discretion that prevents the U.S. government from deporting qualified, eligible students. And as of the status was good for 2 years, and as of November 2014, which will be effective next month. There's a 90-day period before it becomes effective. Now President Obama has extended the period of time from 2 to 3 years to be eligible for undocumented youth. And at that 3-year period, students can reapply to renew their DACA status. So as I mentioned, what it is not a law, it's not a regulation, which makes it controversial, makes it contested, and I'll talk about what some of the limitations of that are. And I'll say it again, it's not visa or long-term amnesty, and it is not permanent, again, because this is a discretionary executive action, so it can be changed or revoked at any time. So who qualifies? This was recently changed as well, so as of November 2000, I'm going to just talk about as of November 2014. So anyone who's arrived in the United States prior to the age of 16, anyone who's continuously resided in the United States without legal status since January 2010, anyone who's enrolled in school, has graduated high school or obtained a GED, or has been an honorably discharged veteran, and then also have a clean criminal record and history. Again, what I mentioned in terms of kind of opportunity is this new protection. So, and this needs to be changed to 3 years. So during the 3 years, recipients are in the United States under the color of U.S. law. So they are protected from removal. They are able to obtain a work permit, a restricted Social Security card, which allows them to apply for work authorization and certain benefits. And those benefits vary state by state. And I would say Illinois has one of the most progressive suite of benefits across the country. Also, access to in-state tuition and other financial aid for public institutions of higher education. Again, this varies from state to state. The limitations. So, as I mentioned before, because this is prosecutorial discretion, the recipients may not be able to extend their, they should be able to extend their status, but it is not guaranteed. I know right before the last presidential election, a lot of students were not applying because they weren't sure what was going to happen if we had a Republican in the White House. It is not in itself a long-term solution for residency or citizenship the way the DREAM Act is. They're not eligible for federal financial aid, federal health care, and other federal programs. Again, this has very significant implications on access to higher education in terms of financial aid, and not only education, but jobs, internships, research stipends, et cetera, that have some sort of connection to federal monies. That continuous presence in the United States limits travel, so you can't leave the country. So if a student wants to go on a travel abroad program, the answer is no, if they want to protect that deferred status. As I mentioned, not all undocumented students are eligible for DACA status based on that criteria, depending on their age. They may have left for a period of time to go visit family. That is not uncommon. You know, I've worked with clients who didn't even know they didn't have status until they came of age to apply for a certain particular benefit or applying to institutes of higher education, and they had gone home to their home country to visit family because of a funeral or sickness or disease or whatnot, and then they therefore don't qualify because they can't prove that continuous presence. And they're not all applying because many students may not find affinity with the Dreamer movement. Many are still concerned that this is not a permanent pathway to residency or citizenship, and they're fearful of exploiting their own status, not knowing what's going to happen in 3 years or during another political term, or what's going to happen to their family. So there's still a lot of unknowns, and particularly for many individuals in the undocumented community who are, it's part of their culture to not want to expose their lack of status, to protect not only themselves but their families. This can be challenging. To note, though, however, Illinois is consistently one of the three to five top states with DACA applications. I had a number which I can't find. I think to date there have been almost over 500,000 applicants for DACA status, and that's expected to grow, particularly since the last extension of the executive order in November that extends the benefits and the age limitations and kind of increases the caps for eligible criteria that were presented before. Thank you.